5 o'clock now. This is the VOC Nation Radio Network, the voice of choice with Namar Wells. And Namar, we are joined right now by the former governor of Minnesota, one of the most polarizing personalities in politics, the author of They Killed Our President, 63 Reasons to Believe There Was a Conspiracy to Assassinate JFK. Get that right now, Amazon.com. Jesse, the Body Ventura. How you doing, Jesse?
Good. You know why I'm polarizing?
Tell me.
Because I'm neither a Democrat or Republican.
Or a Democrat or Republican.
Republican, exactly. That's the reason that mainstream media will characterize you as that. I'm common sense is what I truly am, and that's the problem is there's no common sense left in government today.
I love the fact that you don't consider yourself a politician. You consider yourself a statesman. That really speaks volumes.
Well, I do that because it's not my career. Politicians are ones who get elected for 25 or 30 years and draw that big retirement and live at the public trough and yet tell you that you need less government while they're sucking on the tit of government. And, those are politicians, people that make it a career. A statesman, which I believe is what our country was supposed to be founded on, are citizens who go and serve and bring their life experiences to bear in that service, and then when they're done serving, they go back to the private sector again and go back into the private world, and there's very few of them. The best one right now is Senator Angus King from Maine. He was independent Governor King from Maine when we were in together back in 2000, and he went back to the private sector for 5 or 6, 7 years, and now has just come back out again and overwhelmingly won the Senate seat in Maine as an independent.
Yeah, I think the American people are really calling out for massive change. You saw that Barak Obama ran on that platform and won the election both times, and I think that's why you're so popular. Go ahead,
But the problem is Barack Obama does not bring any change. What people need to understand is that change is not going to happen by simply switching from a Democrat to a Republican or a Republican to a Democrat. You will get the same government. That's what they want you to do. That's what they work you at. That's the scheme of the whole thing. You're going to get the same government. The only time you will truly get change is to stop electing Democrats and Republicans.
Well, it's funny because, the mainstream media really tries their best to stay away from you. You did the Piers Morgan interview on CNN, but the mainstream media is afraid of you, and I've heard you say over and over again during this shutdown, which was caused by Democrats and Republicans, that there should be a tax break in America because why should we have to pay taxes when the government wasn't in service?
Exactly. We pay for services. We pay for services rendered by a government, and if the government shuts down in any capacity, that means they're not giving us the services that they're promising to us. So therefore, our taxes should show the same type of reduction. Now, it shouldn't be tax-free because certainly some portions of government, what they called essential, stayed operational, but a great majority of things were shut down. So therefore, we should get a tax break. But I would caution you, don't hold your breath and wait for that one.
Yeah, Go ahead, Namar. I'm sorry.
It's funny because in response to that, I think about how whenever I have a issue with my phone service and my phone service is down for a couple of days, and once it's fixed, I give them a call, and there's a deduction for the days that my phone was not in service.
Exactly. You weren't provided that service, so why should you pay for it?
Right on.
Jesse, this book, this is one of your best books. It's out right now, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. You're doing that signing at the St. Cloud Barnes & Noble on November 22nd. It's They Killed Our President, 63 Reasons to Believe There Was a Conspiracy to Assassinate JFK. One of my favorite parts in the book is your talk about your visit to Cuba when you were governor of Minnesota and you asked Castro if he was behind JFK's murder. Can you talk about that? Because that's very, very interesting.
Absolutely. I took the chance. I thought, my goodness, I'm going to get to sit face-to-face with Fidel Castro. I was thrilled. I thought, how many people in the world get this opportunity? And, you know, Castro was someone I grew up hearing his name and trembled in fear, you know, from our government and how they would portray Fidel Castro, this horrible dictator of Cuba, and who we had to kill or do anything to get rid of him. And so here I was going to get a chance to meet him, and I thought, well, don't wreck it. Don't ask him what you want to ask him. And it was interesting because he was very perceptive. Now, this was 10 years ago or more, so, and I know his health has failed him a lot since then. But when I was sitting with him, I wore a watch, and at the 40-minute mark, I happened to just glance at my watch because he had only given me an hour, and I wanted to see how much time I had left. And he caught me. He said, "Excuse me, am I keeping you from something?" And I knew, tell the truth. So I looked and said, "No, sir." But I said, "You've only given me an hour." And I said, "And there were some personal questions I wanted to make sure I had time to ask you." And he looked at me and said, "Ask me anything you'd like." And so I went into the background of Kennedy. I said, "I've been studying it most of my adult life." And I said, "In many of these scenarios, you figure very prominent." I said, "You were alive then. I would love to hear what you felt about what occurred that day." Oh, I couldn't shut him up. I bet you if I had 2 more hours, he would have talked to me. If we would have had longer.
Now,
and,
Jesse,
yeah.
No, I was continue. I was going to say, give me a summary of what Castro had to say about the assassination.
Well, he stated, first of all, it was an inside job. That was his perception. Second, he said that I love my country. I wouldn't commit suicide. I had nothing to do with it. He said if I had taken part in anything like that and the United States government caught me, he said they would have wiped Cuba off the face of the earth. I love my country too much to ever do that. And he then said that let's see, it was an inside job. Oh, and he looked right at me and said, Oswald couldn't make the shots. He goes, "You know that as well as I." He said, "One of my jobs during the revolution was to train sniping," and he said there's no way he could make those shots. It was his feeling. He then stated to me that he was very close to the Soviets at that time, and he said the Soviets had told him about Kennedy, "You can talk to this man." In other words, there's dialogue going on here that there could be a breakthrough with this man. And so he said that's what the Soviets had told me, and then he dropped the bombshell that I didn't know about at that time, and which I found out is all completely true. At the moment Kennedy was killed, he was meeting with a French reporter named Jean Daniel, and Daniel had been sent by Kennedy to Castro to set up a secret meeting, and Castro, it was to believe, to talk about dropping the embargo against Cuba and us starting to coexist with them.
Now, there's a lot
and it was during that meeting, word came in, and Jean Daniel backed this up. Word came in that Kennedy had been killed in Dallas. Jean Daniel said Castro stared at the floor, shook his head, and muttered, "This is bad. This is very bad."
Wow.
That's heavy stuff. That's heavy stuff.
Painting that picture in my brain, it's just an amazing scene. I can't even imagine it. But one of the things I want to go back to is you said that in your conversation with Castro, he said, and you agreed, that shot could not have been made. The way that the bullet went through Kennedy's head, that shot couldn't have came from Lee Harvey Oswald. You tested that on your show, Conspiracy Theory, which aired on True TV up until last year, I think. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. We tried to duplicate the shots, and I didn't even have a moving target. And I can still shoot, gentlemen. I qualified expert with an M16 while I was still governor up at Camp Ripley. And I shot in the military. I've always been very comfortable with weapons. They're not a problem with me. And as a member of the Navy SEAL team, you shoot probably more weapons than anybody else in all of the military, just in a rehearsal form. And I could not make the shots, but if you don't believe me, we recreated them, and I didn't even have moving targets. And yet I showed the first shot, which would be the best, I hit with that whenever I wanted to. But it was the second and third you couldn't do. You couldn't work the bolt action fast enough, and with that crappy sight, you couldn't get back on target. And then I learned that the actual Oswald weapon, the sight itself, required 2 shins. It's right in the Warren report to make it accurate. Talk to any hunter in the land, and they will tell you, you don't go hunting with a weapon that hasn't been sighted in. Why would you go to attempt to assassinate the president, if that was your intention, with a weapon that hadn't even been sighted in correctly?
Now you open the book, speaking of that Warren report, with basically there's a memo or documentation that proves a cover-up was in place prior to the assassination. Then you have the Warren report, which basically starts the cover-up, and that's the second conspiracy. So the first theory was to kill Kennedy. The second was to cover up the assassination. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the document you're talking about actually is to cover it up. That's the Katzenbach memo. Excuse me. That's from Acting Attorney General Nixon Katzenbach, and it happened right after the murder. Kennedy had been killed on Friday. Oswald had been killed on Sunday. This was Monday morning, a memo that the acting attorney general, naturally Bobby didn't come into work, his brother had been murdered, so you could excuse him. U.S. Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach sent this memo to Lyndon Johnson Monday morning, and it states, and I'll paraphrase it down because it's a couple of pages, we printed it in its entirety, but it says, number one, the public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, that he did not have any Confederates who are still at large, and that the evidence is such that he would have been convicted at trial. And then it goes on and it finishes the memo with, we need something to head off public speculation or congressional hearings of the wrong sort. I would love to get a definition of congressional hearings of the wrong sort. What are those?
I don't think that you could even make sense of that if you try, Jesse.
I mean, that means a hearing to find out the truth?
Right.
To discover who killed and murdered our president? That's a hearing of the wrong sort? And to me, this is not a smoking gun. This is a smoking cannon. There were 2 conspiracies that took place that day, the actual conspiracy to murder the president and then the conspiracy to cover it up. And this memo shows you exactly, it tells you the whole thing of what they're going to do with the cover-up, and it's exactly what they did. It's a lot like that thing that came out on 9/11, where that group and with Cheney and all of them, Rumsfeld, where they said that in order to implement everything we've recommended, it'll take many years unless a Pearl Harbor type of event were to occur. Are you familiar with that?
Absolutely, and that's something you go into.
Well, this kind of reminds me of the same thing. Those two things really, to me, parallel each other.
I agree with you, and I think that's the reason that the mainstream media, those guys aren't allowed to agree with you. I think that we were talking about this before you came on.
Now, let me ask a question of you. Who doesn't allow them to do that?
Well, that's the thing. You talk about the secret government running America, and that's the thing that's always got me. And I know, Namar, you and I talked about this before the governor came on. The money runs the country, and then the money runs the media. So it's the same people, Jesse, and I know that this is something that you talk about a lot. So can you go into that, the secret government and following the money trail and the control of the media?
The basic thing is this: money runs everything. You know, like when Deep Throat in All the President's Men in the bowels of that parking lot told Woodward, "Follow the money." Well, that's a very accurate statement. If you want to find out what government's doing, follow the money. The money will lead you to the answer because everything is money today. They've created a system in our country today that is based completely upon bribery. Campaign contributions from corporations now, it's all bribery. Whoever bribes the candidates the most money and gets them elected gets the favors in Washington. They get the legislation that helps them out. That's the system the Democrats and Republicans have created, and it goes beyond that. It then goes to what they call foreign aid. If I became president, foreign aid would end tomorrow because we're broke. How can you give aid if you're broke? It's that simple. We're in debt. We can't give anybody aid. I had to laugh when they lifted the debt ceiling. Remember when they had to do that a couple weeks ago?
Sure.
You know what the first thing they did when they lifted the debt ceiling? They sent Pakistan billions and billions of dollars. They get the money, and it goes on our charge card. Pay for it. Now, going back to the bribery, that's what foreign aid is. When they give this money to these foreign countries, it's bribery. They're bribing them to go along with whatever corporate policies we want to institute throughout the world.
Right.
Sure.
And so the Dems and Repubs have created an entire system that goes even into foreign aid based upon the concept of bribery. If we do that in the private sector, guess what? We go to jail.
Namar, I know. Oh, I'm sorry, Jesse. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I mean, the hypocrisy is astounding, isn't it?
Go ahead. It blows my mind.
You know, Jesse, that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you. You talk about how in politics it's hard to, everything's about bribery. Your time in office, did you find it increasingly difficult, as your job as mayor and governor, dealing with the system that was in play before you took office? Did you upset a lot of people? What was that like?
Yes to all of that. I found it didn't bother me in the least because when I ran for governor, I only raised $300,000 and it was all in $50 donations from individual citizens. I didn't take any PAC money, corporate money, or special interest money. And I told my staff the first day that I wouldn't meet with any lobbyists, and I didn't for 4 years because they didn't elect me, so what are they going to do for me? Nothing. So I can honestly say I bet I'm the only governor who spent 4 years in office and never met with a lobbyist. And, yeah, it caused a lot of problems because it caused a big upturn in how the system works because these lobbyists get paid to get audience and persuade the governor or the president, whoever it might be, to do what they want them to do and bribe them. Well, if they can't get in your office, they can't bribe you, can they?
Right.
There you go. So I can bet they were happy to see me leave and have it get back to normal with the Democrat or Republican again, where the bribery can then start all over. But and that's when I've talked about going for president, I've made mention of how I would do it. I have to do it the unorthodox way to keep my integrity. And that's why I said I needed Howard Stern. I need someone who can raise me the kind of money and $50 donations from people so I can keep my integrity. Because $50 ain't going to get you in my door. You follow me?
Right.
Yeah,
But if I get enough of those 50s, I can win an election, which I proved in Minnesota. They never like to talk about my election in Minnesota because what we did was astounding. Did you know that I only had one paid person on my entire election? And that was the guy that ran the whole thing because he left his private sector job, so we paid him a minimum amount of money so he could pay the bills. Everybody else was a volunteer.
Wow.
Nobody got paid. My contribution, I didn't spend $1 of my own money. My contribution was I drove all over the state with my private car. I paid for my own gas. I never charged it back. So that was my personal contribution. But I didn't spend $1 of my own money otherwise. There's no politician in the world. I actually made more money doing the job than what I spent to get it.
Wow.
Nobody else can say, and I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that to give hope that it can be done and to give hope that you can still win a campaign on ideas and that it doesn't have to all be about who you bribe and who you pay off and how many crazy TV lying ads you run on television.
Well, let me ask you this, Governor, because you've said, I'm not going to ask you if you'll run for president in 2016. I'm going to pose it a different way. What will it take to get you to run for president in 2016? And is the Howard Stern thing a joke? Is that something that's legitimate? Would he really be your running mate?
It's not a joke, because I just explained why I need Howard. I need someone who has the ability to raise the money. Plus, I could campaign on his show every day. They can't take him off the air because the FCC doesn't govern Sirius Radio. Follow me? So it wouldn't cost me no money. And that's how you get grassroots going. For every 10 stern listeners, you tell them to go recruit 10 more. And that's the way you got to do it. It has to be done my way. It has to be done the unorthodox way so that I wouldn't sell out my soul and become one of them.
Is it possible, Governor Ventura, for you to make the changes that need to be made in society, in government, with the two-party system in place? So if you're an independent president, wouldn't you still have to go up against the bipartisan Congress?
Yeah, and that's why the people have to stay with you. That was the big mistake that happened in Minnesota, is after they elected me, everybody kind of went back to their own business then, and they had the attitude, well, the big guy will take care of it all. They didn't realize that in order to do this, if it were to happen, the people would have to stay with me. They have to be vigilant citizens. You have to stay engaged, because that's the only thing these people understand. And if they go back to what they do and don't pay attention, then it becomes extremely difficult. The way it worked for me in Minnesota was simple. I had a Republican House and a Democratic Senate. Whoever I sided with generally prevailed until the last year, the election year. That's when those two sides got in bed together. They overturned my budget. They brought forth their smoke and mirror budget, which I vetoed twice. They overrode my veto. That was one of the reasons I left office, because I thought, I'm not going to work on their budget. It's supposed to be the governor's budget. I'm not going to get blamed for what they did. And subsequently, they banked on the fact they thought the economy would get better. It didn't. It got worse. A couple years ago, they were in debt $5 billion in Minnesota for what they tried to do to me.
Unreal.
And that shows you that they don't care about the people. They care about their party first. And that's why the only solution to taking our country back is to abolish and get rid of these political parties, turn them into political action committees. Let me speak quickly here. And the easy way to start to do that, it can be done locally. Stop printing the names of political parties on election ballots. Put only the name of the candidate.
That's right. An interesting concept. And see, that would take the blind populace. It would take the whole idea of voting straight down party lines. It would force people to actually be educated on the candidates.
Bingo. Very good. Bingo. God, you guys are bright. It didn't take you long at all.
Well, see, we're not part of the mainstream media anymore. We're not governed by the FCC anymore, and that's why I think I could be Secretary of State tomorrow. You could be the, something else, some other position in the cabinet. I think that's a good idea. We can get.
But anyway, getting back to what would take for me to run, I need ballot access in all 50 states as an independent. I'll tell you what I'd run and win on right now. I would give the American people the opportunity to join me and make history and elect the first president since George Washington, the father of our country, who does not belong to a political party. And I believe you could win on that message alone.
Amen. Amen. Namar, the book is called They Killed Our President, 63 Reasons to Believe There Was a Conspiracy to Assassinate JFK. You had a very interesting question for the governor about whether or not what the country would be like if JFK would still be alive. Why don't you ask that?
You just did. But, Jesse, that was the question. What do you think the country would be like had JFK had lived and he was able to implement a lot of the policies that we believe were the reasons why he got assassinated?
I think the first thing you'd need to do is correct that statement to this. It isn't what the country would be like if he had lived. What would the world be like if he had lived? Not just us, the world. That's what this murder did. It changed the course of not the United States, of the world. Because in my investigation of this, I've learned John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev were back-channel communicating after the Cuban Missile Crisis, neither of the countries' people knew about it. And they had both agreed that they were going to end the Cold War by 1965.
Wow.
Now, where would here's what would have been different. There would have been no Vietnam War. Imagine how that would change everything. And imagine if the Cold War had ended in the 60s rather than in the 80s. 20 years less, it would have turned the world in a direction towards peaceful coexistence. Instead, his murder turned the world to war existence, and we've been on that track ever since. There is the difference.
Well, again, you follow the money, and I'm sure that the people that prospered from all of those wars are very, very grateful that that fateful event happened almost 50 years ago. 50 years ago from exactly next week today, 50 years ago.
You're right on with that. Yes, they're very grateful. They've made huge amounts of money. That's what wars are all about. They're not about ideologies fighting each other. They're about somebody's making money. That they've been that way my entire life. I am born after World War II, 1951, and I cannot tell you one war concludes where I figured out what it was fought for and what was it worth it. None of them. Not a one.
Amen. Jesse
right.
Ventura.
That goes to another question. What is it, and you have this book about, JFK, and we talked about a lot of different things with politics, and what is it with the American populace that they seem not to want to accept these conspiracy theories in order to change the system that would actually be for their betterment?
Well, because they don't realize it would be for their benefit. Look at on TV how war is portrayed with these video games that you see every day. It's gallant. It's what you want. It's exciting. They're taking man's depravity at his lowest level, which is war, and they're turning it into something glorious. You know the video games I'm talking about? I see them on TV every day that I watch being advertised.
Right.
And they're so authentic. And they put you in the game as being this hero that can kill everything around you. Now, when you start programming people like that for generations and generations, you become a warlike society. We're glorifying war when the reality is war is man at his worst. War is failed politics. When politicians fail, the end result is war. You don't consider a politician successful if the politician fights wars. That means the politician was a failure, in my opinion.
Very, 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 very powerful words. Jesse, I want to ask you. The VOC Nation radio network.
Let me throw this in. Ronald Reagan, who's the poster boy for the right-wing Republicans, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Sure.
What did Ronald Reagan do when the Lebanon barracks were hit with the car bomb back in the 80s? He cut and ran. He got out of there. They killed 200 and some of our Marines. Did Ronald Reagan go to war? No. I use that term cut and ran because that's what the Republicans say. You're going to cut and run? Well, Ronald Reagan did. He got the hell out of there. And let me give you another little bit of history to think about here. Christopher Columbus. Now, let's not go into whether he's good or bad or any of that, but he discovered America allegedly for the Anglo-Saxon European, right?
Sure.
What was he doing? He was going against science at that time, which said the world was flat. He was willing to fall off the end of the earth because what was he trying to discover? He was trying to discover another way to India to where he could avoid the Middle East. Now, if Columbus would fall off the earth to avoid the Middle East 600 or 700, 800 years ago, why are we still involved in the Middle East?
That's a very good question.
What the hell? Why don't we look at what Columbus looked at and learn from that and say Columbus was willing to fall off the earth to find another way to the Middle East, or to India. And that's why when he came here, they called the Native Americans Indians, because he thought he had arrived in India.
Yeah, Jesse, since the beginning of time, that is the source, that is almost the birthplace of every major conflict. So it makes sense. It makes sense, and yet we still continue to toil in the politics over there. And it's the reason George Washington said he wanted to be an independent nation and to stay out of the affairs of the foreign nations.
Exactly. Read the works of Major General Smedley Darlington Butler. You never hear about him because they don't want you to know about him. This man cannot be questioned. He's a Marine. He won not one, but 2 Congressional Medals of Honor. And he wrote the most anti-war book on the planet called War is a Racket. He wrote it about 100 years ago, or maybe 80, and it applies completely today. Smedley Butler said back then, General Butler, I didn't fight for the American people, I fought for the United Fruit Corporation. When they would go into Central and South America, if they didn't get cooperation, they'd send in the Marines to get it.
Unreal.
Now that's 100 years ago almost. And you know what Smedley Butler said we need to do?
Tell us.
He said we need to pass a constitutional amendment that the United States military cannot go over 500 miles from our border.
Do you think that'll ever happen?
It would if I got in there as president, because why are our military is supposed to protect our country, not have 178 bases throughout the world and be out there fighting. You know those ads the Navy does, they just get to me when they go, a global force for good. Excuse me, my tax dollars pay for them. They're a United States force for good, not global.
Well, and that's part of the problem. That's a big problem in this country is, we're not almost, but the United States tries to be the police of the free world, and that's,
it's
again,
called an empire.
Something that
it's
George
called an
Washington.
Empire.
And empires fall, Governor Ventura.
Exactly. We are following to a T the Roman Empire.
Well, I think
somebody'd care to read about it and say, wait a minute, look what happened to Rome here.
History repeats itself.
And the unfortunate thing, I'm old enough, I'm seeing it repeating itself now in decades, not even in lifetimes.
Governor, do you think that the reason that people in the mainstream don't take you as serious as they probably should is because of your professional wrestling background? And we grew up out of Philadelphia radio as a wrestling medium and grew into one of the largest digital mediums in the country, and so the wrestling connection is there, and you have a wrestling connection. Does that hurt your credibility, the wrestling part of it?
Maybe. I don't know. You'd have to ask the media that. I mean, if we truly want to go back far enough, Abraham Lincoln was a wrestler.
Yeah, very true.
Very true. I don't see where I've broken any new ground. President Lincoln was a wrestler, and why should that have any bearing on anything? I mean, wrestling's a business. I was pretty good at it. I earned a great living at it, and we're supposed to be a citizen government. Where did it ever say that you were required to go to law school to serve?
Well, go ahead, Namar.
Sorry, that's one of the things, Bruce, that we alluded to at the beginning. They will find any particular way to dismiss somebody that has an opposite idea that is beyond the norm, and that's a continued problem. Like Jesse mentioned, what in the world does his wrestling career have to do with anything, especially if his message is one about true government reform, and doing things correctly and righteously? It's just another tool that people use to dismiss the truth.
Exactly, and let's look at it this way. When I wrestled, I paid a lot of taxes. And I like to know what my money's go. People ask me, how did you get so knowledgeable of government? Because they were taking half my money.
Wow.
When they take half your money, you'd like to know what it's being spent on.
Now, what do you say to the people that criticized you? You made a WWE appearance during your tenure as the governor of Minnesota. What do you say to the critics that tell you shouldn't have done that?
Well, first of all, I gave all the money to charity. I started my Roosevelt High School Scholarship Fund where I've given a $5,000 scholarship to a kid from my inner city high school now for the last 14 or 15 years. I think that's a pretty good thing to do with the payoff, don't you?
Well, it's not reported, so that's something that you're breaking news right here, Governor Ventura.
Well, not really. They knew it. I stated that when I did referee it. I said that my appearance fee will go to charity, and it did. It didn't, not exactly charity, but it went to that I created my Roosevelt High School Scholarship Fund with it. And so, if anyone wants to criticize me for that, have at it. I mean, what else? I'm proud of it, and I will always be very proud of it. And I'm so happy today that I've helped young people advance their education to where many of them are today professionals who will pay my Social Security because they'll have good jobs.
This all ties together, and it all ties together, and it's a very, very intriguing question. I'm going to ask you what your relationship's like today with Vince McMahon, but and with the whole big business running the world and big business running the government, is it really true that
big
your
business
dismissal...
runs wrestling now, too.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Is it true that your dismissal from the WWE in 1990 was really over a Nintendo versus Sega battle?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
It was over a video game. Apparently, Vince had signed a contract with one video company, and he didn't own me. And I had signed a personal contract with a rival company, and Vince told me I couldn't do that. And if I did do it, I would be dismissed from the WWF. And I told him, you don't own me. I can sign with whoever I want. You don't have that ownership. I never signed a contract with him. That was one of the reasons I was able to defeat him later in federal court, because I was never under any contract with him. And, yeah, that's essentially correct what you said. I don't know how you learned that, because I certainly haven't talked about it. But what you said is absolutely correct.
Now, how's your relationship with Vince McMahon today? And is there any, a lot of the wrestling fans always want to know.
It was good until his wife ran for the Senate, I think. And the press came to me and asked if I would endorse her, and I said no. And it wasn't because it was Linda McMahon. It's because she's a Republican. I don't endorse any Republican or any Democrat. If she had run as an independent, free from the Republican Party, I would have considered it, certainly. But that's a rule I have, and I heard Vince got angry at me because I said that publicly, that I wouldn't endorse her. And then, of course, I had some fun with him when I stated that if he'd pay me that much money as they paid to run Linda twice, I would be the president. Because I wouldn't know what to do with that kind of money if I ran for a political office, considering that I only raised $300,000 to become the governor of Minnesota.
Well, you know what's good about that is that when you watch her speech when she lost, I think Vince's sentiment was the same as yours, because he looked terribly upset.
Well, again, he spent I won't do that. I refuse to spend my own money on a political office. Why would you spend your money to do public service? Isn't public service that?
Absolutely.
So, to me, that's insane. Take your own money and spend it to get a job within the public service government? No. You run for office on ideas. You're forced to raise some money because you've got to put out ads and stuff to advertise what you stand for. But as long as you're allowed in the debates, which is what a prerequisite, when you asked me earlier what it would take to get me to run, two things would have to be met. Because I don't run to lose, I run to win. I would have to have ballot access in all 50 states, and I would have to have some type of guarantee that I'd be allowed in the debates. Because if you're not allowed in the debates, you have no chance of winning. And those two things would have to be met.
And how does that
difficult.
happen? That's grassroots all the way?
Yep.
Fair enough.
Ballot access in all 50 states. You wrestling people could do that for me.
Well,
Gosh, you guys got wrestling fans in all 50 states. Just have them go out and get Jesse Ventura ballot access for president in all 50 states. All it requires is legwork. You got to sign petitions and do that kind of nonsense. Every state is different. There's an interesting thing, isn't it? You're going for a federal office. Shouldn't it be the same in every state?
Well, you would think so.
But
it's one
not.
Government, right? It's one government.
Yeah, but it's not. They do that on purpose so that any independent like me is forced to jump through all these multiple hoops in which to accomplish it. That's the difficult thing, is getting ballot access in all 50 states.
Jesse, if you don't mind, I know we've taken up a lot of your time today, and we're probably about...
Yeah, it's my daughter's birthday today, so we're going to end it pretty soon because we're going out to dinner with her.
Yeah, we planned for about 15 minutes, and we're on 45, so I apologize. And I just want to end with a little word association. I'll give you 3 names. You give me the first thing that comes to your mind, or 3 concepts, the first things that come to your mind, and then we'll let you go off and prepare for your daughter's birthday, and then November 22nd over there in St. Paul at the Barnes & Noble for your book signing.
St. Cloud. St. Cloud.
I'm sorry, St. Cloud.
Yeah, big difference between St. Cloud and St. Paul.
There is. The roads are better. Jesse, so we got your feelings on Vince McMahon. Hulk Hogan was a guy who you've talked about him as the guy that kind of squealed to Vince that you were the guy that tried to unionize in 1984. Is Hogan a guy that you still have respect for? Have you guys kind of patched that up?
No, not at all. I haven't spoken to him or seen him since I left wrestling in 1990 over that video thing.
How about Eric Bischoff?
Last time I saw him was when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2004, and I don't particularly care for him either.
Namar, you want to end it with your word association?
Yeah, it's more so a concept. Looking over your career, Jesse, what would you say about commentating versus wrestling?
Which did I like better?
Yeah, which was the most fulfilling aspect of your wrestling career?
Commentating. It hurt a lot less. No, and the fact that by the time I started to commentate wrestling, I was making as much or more money doing that than I was wrestling, because the business had switched from really being into the ring to television. And because it had made that switch to television, I was able to get contracts that were, and that's one of the big reasons I quit wrestling, because I thought, why go in there and get body slammed anymore when I can make more money just talking about it?
Makes perfect sense to me, and
well, it hurts. You know, people can say what they want about pro wrestling, but and there's guys that did it way harder than me. But at one point in my career, I actually wrestled 63 consecutive nights in a row.
Jesse, I always say when people talk about wrestling, because we've done some little skits over the years around the country, and when people say, well, is wrestling fake? I always say, well, why don't you fall to the ground? Most people, when they fall, they try to break their fall by putting their arm out. But instead of doing that, why don't you fall to the ground as hard as you can to make the loudest sound that you can, and you tell me if it hurts.
Yeah, well, I've got a good answer, too. Here's how I answer it when they say that. I say wrestling is ballet with violence. Now, nobody looks at a great Russian ballet dancer and says that's not an athlete, do they?
Of course not.
They're phenomenal athletes. Well, wrestlers are the same thing. Wrestlers are phenomenal athletes. It's ballet, only we incorporate violence into the ballet. That's all.
Jesse, the Russians are smart. They put a pair of skates on them and send them to the Olympics.
Yeah, but we beat them.
They killed our president.
My good friend, the late Herb Brooks, a dear friend of mine, let me state this. I always knew I was doing the job right when I was governor, because I would run into the great Herb Brooks, and Herb would look at me with those steely eyes that you saw in the movie Miracle, played so well by Kurt Russell. He had Brooks to a T. Brooks would look at me and he'd raise that fist up and he'd say, Jesse, you keep giving them hell over there. And that's how I knew I was doing a good job. When Herb Brooks gives you his blessing, you're doing it the right way.
Jesse Ventura, they killed our president. with Dick Russell and David Wayne, Skyhorse Publishing. You'll be at the Barnes & Noble, St. Cloud, Minnesota, November 22nd. Go to Amazon.com to buy the book. Jesse, give me a percentage on your way out. What's the percentage chance that you'll run for president in 2016?
50-50.
50-50. Jesse, I love you to death. Thank you so much for spending way too much time with us.
Okay, thanks, guys. We'll do it again
today.
sometime. Bye-bye.
All right, appreciate it. Jesse Ventura